It's the end of the year, which means it's time to go over every single book I read in 2024. I read a total of 95 books this year, which is absolutely insane because if you would have asked me last week how many books I read, I would have told you 84. Within the last couple of days, I really challenged myself to see how many more books I could read before the end of the year, and I actually made that a video, so that will be coming out shortly, but I ended up reading 11 books. A lot of them were short stories, and that's why I was able to read so many at once, but that definitely helped me get some more books read before I filmed this video. My reading goal on Goodreads this year, I did just set for one book because I didn't want the number to stress me out too much during the year, and I really enjoyed doing that. I read 95 books last year, I read 95 books this year. I found a lot of new authors and a lot of 5-star books. So with all that being said, let's just go ahead and get started. I am going to quickly go over each one and give you a yes, no, or maybe, depending on if I thought it was worth reading. The first book I read in 2024 was Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. This was her memoir about losing her mother. It was very grief heavy and I wasn't expecting that. So this was absolutely devastating. Worth the read, but check trigger warnings. I also read Lauren Graham's memoir, Talking as Fast as I Can. She gave us a lot of behind the scenes of Gilmore Girls, which I absolutely loved. Worth the read. It basically sounds like Lorelai is just venting to you. Keeping up with the memoir trend, I also read Tom Felton's Behind the Wand. If you're a fan of Harry Potter, this is definitely worth the read. He gives us a lot of behind the scenes of what it was like on set and what it was like for him growing up in the industry. Next, I have my first 5-star read of 2024, which was The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. No surprise here, I always love Adrienne Young's writing, but this was absolutely fantastic. I still think about this story. I would recommend going into it completely blind. That's the best way to experience this. Up next, I read Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This was a sequel to Divine Rivals. I think I liked Divine Rivals more. I wouldn't read this unless you absolutely loved the first book because I didn't, and I don't think this one was worth the read for me. Up next, I read The Stranger Upstairs by Lisa M. Maitland. This is basically about a murder house and she moves in trying to renovate it. I remember thinking this one was okay. I did like the fact that I couldn't predict the ending though, so I'll say maybe worth the read. Up next, I have one of my new favorite books of all time, and it is Almond by Won Pyong Sun. This was one of my first literary fiction books of the year and it absolutely blew my mind. In this, we're following a boy who has this brain condition that doesn't allow him to experience feelings the way we do, and we're watching him try to navigate life on his own. Super unique, super heartbreaking. This one really stuck with me after reading. After that, I read Notes on an Execution by Danya Kakofka. I really enjoyed the way that this was set up. We basically learn about this man on death row through the point of views of different women in his life. I wasn't necessarily immersed the entire time, but it was a very unique read, so maybe on this one. After that, I read Powerless by Lauren Roberts. It felt like I read this so long ago. This was a really fast-paced, easy to read YA fantasy. I know this one gets mixed reviews. I actually enjoyed it for what it was. I do agree that this reminded me of other fantasy books that I've read before, but I still had a good time reading it, so I'm gonna say worth the read. This year, I read 2 books in the Ruminous Love trilogy, Butcher and Blackbird, and then Leather and Lark by Brynne Weaver. I know I'm not in the majority, but I truly think that these books are overhyped. It's basically a romance between 2 serial killers who kill other serial killers, and that concept I absolutely loved. I hated the execution. I decided to read book 2 because I wanted to see if I liked it better, and I did, but not enough to read the 3rd book in the series. I don't think these are worth reading, but a lot of people would disagree with me. Next book I read is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This was her memoir about her experience in a abusive queer relationship. One of the most insane pieces of writing I've ever read. Her writing style is unmatched in my opinion. Even though we're reading one story, each chapter she decided to write in a different genre. So it feels like a bunch of different mini stories, but they're all creating this bigger picture. Definitely worth the read. I want to read so much more Carmen Maria Machado in the future. After that, I read Starling House by Alex E. Haro. This would be a good quick read for spooky season. This is like a modern gothic fantasy. There's a haunted house involved. Even if you think the beginning is slow, it ends up somewhere you won't even predict. After that, I read No One Can Know by Kate Ellis Marshall. I love Kate Ellis Marshall. Her mystery thrillers are so fast-paced, there's always twists and turns and I can never see where it's going. I think she's gonna be a new auto-buy author for me, so I'm gonna say worth it, but I did like What Lies in the Woods more than this one. Up next, I have Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig. This was the sequel to One Dark Window. Honestly, such a good fantasy duet. If you want to get into fantasy but don't want to commit to an entire series, I always think duets are the way to go, and this one was such a good one. After that, I have Rouge by Mona Wad. I've talked about this book multiple times this year, and I don't think I gave this book enough credit when I read it. I knew it was unique, I knew it was unsettling, and just the most bizarre fever dream-like book that I had read, but what I didn't know is that I would be chasing that feeling all year after reading this, and I could never get it again. Mona Wad has definitely become one of my favorite authors of all time. This book in particular was done so well. At no point did I really understand what was happening until the end, but basically our main character is going down this treacherous path in search of youth and beauty, but it's just absolutely insane. So well done. I want to see this as a movie almost, but I don't think they'd be able to do it justice. This is definitely one of my favorites of the year though. I wish I would have recognized that at the time when I was reading it. After that, I read Jade City by Fonda Lee. I honestly did not love this first book. I own the rest of the series, so I do think I'll eventually pick up those and see where the story goes. I just didn't really find myself interested until about halfway through the book, and it's so long I don't think it should have taken that long for me to really get hooked. I do think the world is interesting, I just didn't love this book in particular. After that, I read Past Perfect Life by Elizabeth Eulberg. This one sounded really interesting. It was a quick YA read, but honestly not my favorite. I would not recommend this one. I just think I've read a lot better YA contemporary books this year. The next book I have is A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. I was super intrigued by this premise because we basically follow a man who has just died and he goes into a hell that's unlike anything we could have imagined. It's a vast library and the only way to get out is if you find the book that contains your life story. This is definitely more of a short story that takes place in this world rather than really exploring what the world is. I liked it for what it was. I could almost read an entire series in this world though. After that, I have Where's Molly by H.D. Carlton. This is a spin-off book to the Cat and Mouse duet. I've talked about it before. I really didn't enjoy this one. I wanted to learn more about Molly, but I thought this romance was forced and didn't need to happen. I only think this is worth the read if you've read the Cat and Mouse duet and want to continue reading books that are going to be spin-offs. I honestly don't think it was worth it until the epilogue, but I am excited for Sibby's book and other books that are supposed to come out in this series. Moving on to the next stack, I have King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair. Honestly, not worth the read in my opinion. I had heard good things about this author, but I did not love this one. It was an arranged marriage type of deal, fast fantasy read, but it was kind of like in one ear and out the other. I couldn't tell you much about it, so I'm gonna say not worth the read. I then have Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. Another one that I thought I was gonna love, I just didn't. I do think it was very atmospheric. I loved the beautiful writing, but the plot I honestly just didn't care about. I'd say worth the read if you're into beautiful writing, but this one was like a little bit of a drag for me, so I'm gonna say not worth the read unless you like things like that. After that, I read Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This was a reread because I read it in school. I just didn't remember it, and I honestly really enjoyed it. Crazy that this is one of the books that are always being challenged to be a banned book. I just think that's so ironic, but this was one of the first classics I read this year. After that, I have another Mona Awad book, All's Well, and I did enjoy this one, just not as much as I enjoyed Rouge. Just like Carmen Maria Machado, I think Mona Awad's writing is so distinct and you won't really find anything else like it. In this one, we're following a girl who basically gets dependent on painkillers, and it's just such a wild ride. After that, I have Gillian McAllister's Just Another Missing Person. I really loved Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. This one I also enjoyed. I just don't think it packed the same punch as the other one. In this one, we're following a detective who is blackmailed into framing the murder on someone who didn't do it. So interesting. I do want to read more Gillian McAllister as well in the new year. Moving right along, I have Suicide Notes from Beautiful Girls by Lynn Wingarden. One of my favorite YA mystery thrillers. I don't know why this one isn't talked about more. Super insane, super twisty. If you like YA mystery thrillers, add this one to your list. After that, I have Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. One of my favorite romance books, I think, of this year. This was my first Abby Jimenez book. It was a book club book, and I absolutely adored it. I do love romance stories that are more than just the romance itself. I love it when the characters have a lot of depth, when the characters are relatable, the relationship is realistic. I can see why this one was a lot of people's favorite of the year. I finally read If We Were Villains by ML Rio, and I completely understand the hype now. 10 out of 10, worth the read. I don't know if I gave this 5 stars, but I honestly should have if I didn't. Dark academia, we're following a group of students who go to this Shakespearean school that basically just studies Shakespeare, put on Shakespeare plays, and we learn all of these secrets and events that happened when they were young. So good. I didn't expect to connect to this one as much as I did, but one of my favorites of the year, truly. After that, I reread The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. While it's an amazing read and a classic for a reason, I wouldn't be able to tell you like what the green light meant if I hadn't like studied that in school. You know what I mean? And I think that's my problem with classics. I need to keep reading them so I'm able to notice like motifs and symbolism and metaphors and things like that, because I feel like a lot of it goes over my head. which is sad, but I'm working on it. I did read The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman because this book was gifted to me by Bailey. Thank you. Honestly, wild ride. I didn't think I knew what to expect, but this was very like magical, whimsical, dark, and I can definitely see the similarities between like this story and Coraline. I did finish the Hades series this year by Tate James, and honestly, one of my favorite dark romance series, I think. I read the first book last year and then Anarchy, Club 22, and Timber this year. There was also a novella vault that ties together this series with the Madison Kate series. Tate James does a reverse harem so well. Hades is also one of my new favorite characters of all time, so do highly recommend, but I would read the Madison Kate series first since this is the spin-off. After that, I picked up Bad Girls with Perfect Faces by Lynn Wingarden because I loved Suicide Notes from Beautiful Girls so much. I will say this one I didn't love as much, but was still insane. Lynn Wingarden, I think, just wants to have the best twists ever, and she's 2 for 2. After that, I read my first Sally Hepworth book, which was Darling Girls, and I'm so happy I found this author this year because I need a solid mystery thriller author that I can always go to and know I'm gonna have a solid story. I really enjoyed this one. If you like mystery thrillers and you have yet to read Sally Hepworth, I would start with this one. Keeping on with the mystery thrillers, I read The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson this year. Regarding mystery thrillers, this has to be one of my favorites. I don't remember if this was YA or not, but regardless, read it. Because I loved I Killed Zoe Spanos by Kit Frick last year, I picked up Very Bad People by Kit Frick, and this one I did not love. I really think I could have done without this book. It just missed the mark for me. I'd skip it. After that, I read Checkmate by Ali Hazelwood. Loved it. One of the only YA romances I read this year and worth the read. After that, I read Call Me By Your Name by Andre Aciman. No one told me how devastating this book was. I don't know why I thought it was going to be this really cute, young love story that takes place in the summer. It was that, but also absolutely devastating. I still have yet to see the movie adaptation, but I really need to. Moving on to these stacks over here. I did read the 4 books in the Vicious Lost Boys series by Nikki St. Crow. I couldn't tell you a single thing about this series. It's one of those dark romances that I think are so fast-paced and juicy, you just read them in one sitting. I devoured the entire series and then it left my head. Must have been entertaining enough for me to purchase all 4 physical copies, but I genuinely could not tell you a single thing about this series. Do with that what you will. After that, I read Being Lolita by Alison Wood. This was her memoir about being taken advantage of by her high school teacher. Very dark, deep, and raw, but I'm glad I read it. Super surprised this one doesn't have more ratings on Goodreads. I don't think a lot of people have read it, so check it out if you're interested. We're getting into summer books now, so I read Sunkissed by Casey West. Super just fast YA contemporary. Again, not my favorite though. I think I would have enjoyed this more if I was younger. A summer book I loved though was One Italian Summer by Rebecca Serrell. I know I'm late with this one. Such a good, well-rounded book because it had romance. There's a lot about mother-daughter relationship, friendship, grief. This genuinely had it all and I was crying by the end of it, so worth the read. Add it to your summertime sadness stack for next year. I also ended up reading Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan this year, which is hilarious because no one's talked about this book for years. It's so old, but I think I found this book while we were book thrifting and I was like, yeah, let me just read this. Everyone's already read it. And I genuinely loved 2/3 of this book. I think the end got a little crazy and unrealistic, and that definitely brought me out of the story a little bit, but a solid read. I can see why it was so popular years ago. After that, I read The Book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James. It was okay. I liked The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James more. I do always like how there's a paranormal aspect to her books though. After that, I read Funny Story by Emily Henry. Emily Henry has been another romance author that I really love other than Abby Jimenez. Funny Story was such a good book. I do think I liked Happy Place more last year, but I know Funny Story was a lot of people's favorite romance of this year. After that, I read Death in Her Hands by Otessa Moshfegh. Again, I love this author. This wasn't my favorite book by this author. I read a lot of those this year, but honestly, I think my least favorite Otessa book that I've read. After that, I read Ghost by Dolly Alderton. Before this, I had only read her memoir, and it's one of my favorite memoirs of all time. But this one really proved that I love her writing no matter what. It's always so relatable, and I always think of her as like the cool aunt you go to for advice. There's something just so loving and warm and inspiring about her writing, and I really enjoyed this one. After that, I read my first Taylor Jenkins Reid book, which is Malibu Rising. Out of all her books, this was the only one that was really calling to me, and while I liked it, I can see why everyone said maybe don't start with this one. I do love books that take place in one sitting, but I don't necessarily think this one is worth the read if you haven't read her other books. After that, I read Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose. I think Geneva Rose is just not for me, and that's okay. Fast-paced mystery thriller, I did read it. I just didn't love it. Speaking of books I didn't love, The Last House Guest by Megan Miranda. I think I've just read better executed versions of this, so I'm gonna say not worth the read. One that is worth the read is Our Crooked Hearts by Melissa Albert. One of the books that completely shocked me. I wasn't expecting to love this as much as I did. Witchcrafty, summertime, but also spooky book, so you could either read it summerween or around spooky season. This one I really enjoyed. I read another Sally Hepworth book, The Soulmate, and I think I like this one even more than Darling Worlds. Absolutely insane. I like how we always get a lot of backstory and like a deep dive into these characters' relationships before we even get into the mystery thriller of it all. After that, I read the third book in the Dark Olympus series, I believe. This was Wicked Beauty by Katie Roberts. They're just really fun, lightly inspired Greek mythologies in modern day time, and they're always really entertaining and spicy. After that, I read Vengeance of the Pirate Queen by Trisha Levenseller. This is book 3 after the Daughter of the Pirate King duet, which you guys know I absolutely loved. I liked this one, but I don't think I connected to it as much as I did with the original duet. So worth it only if you loved the duet. One of my biggest accomplishments of the year was finally finishing the Zodiac Academy series by Caroline Peckham and Suzanne Valenti. This is a 9-book series, but technically there's 11 books, which is insane. I always have mixed feelings about this series because it's so incredibly long. I love the characters, I love the world, I love the plot, I love the storyline. I just don't think they needed to drag it out as long as they did. You could definitely feel in the books that a lot of it is filler, and that's really frustrating when all you want to do is get to the end and like find out what's actually going to happen. But I love that it starts off as like a bully romance that takes place in a fantasy world and then completely transformed to a full-fledged high fantasy, high stakes type of series. I do think the series takes a while to get used to, but I really do think it's worth the read if you love the characters and you're down to stick with it for 11 books. Moving on to the last stack, I ended up reading Assistant to the Villain. This was another book club book. I'm personally going to say not worth the read, but it was fun to read with other people. I finally read Uglies by Scott Westerfield because I knew the movie adaptation was coming out this year. Loved the book. I always love YA dystopian, so it's no shock to me that I enjoyed this. I will say the movie adaptation I thought wasn't great, but the way that the movie ended, that inspired me to read the rest of the series, where when I finished this book, I wasn't sure if I was going to read the rest. After that, I read The Counselors by Jessica Goodman. This was a really good summer book. It takes place in a summer camp, there's a murder mystery, and I could not predict the ending. If you want like a step up of this story, this book is where it's at. The God of the Woods by Liz Moore was absolutely incredible. Same type of premise. It takes place at this campsite and one of the campers goes missing. The reason why this stirs so much drama is because years beforehand, her older brother had disappeared in a similar manner. This book wasn't as fast paced. We are following so many people, but it's all painting one picture. Once you get to the end of this, I think you'll love it, but it is more of like a slow burn type of mystery where you have to learn who everyone is and how they all connect before you can get answers to what happened in the story. After that, I read another Sally Hepworth, The Younger Wife, and actually I didn't love this one as much as I loved her other 2 books that I read. This just felt less of a mystery and more trying to navigate this dysfunctional family, which is fine, just not what I wanted from it. After that, I read Kill Switch by Penelope Douglas. This is book 3, I believe, in the Devil's Night series. I was most excited for this book just because of the character that this book follows, and I think this was my least favorite one of the whole series. Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. I'll keep it short and sweet. Don't read it. House of Hollow by Krista Sutherland. Read it. Absolutely insane book. Insane book. Whether you like YA or not, I would read this and read it during spooky season. It's terrifying. After that, I read Like Mother, Like Daughter by Kimberly McCreight, another mystery thriller that missed the mark for me. Crazy things that happened, but I just don't think I liked it as much as I liked The Outliers by this author. After that, I read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Way less scary than I was anticipating because I've seen clips of the movie adaptation or the show adaptation and that looks crazy. In this one, we're just following a group of people who are staying at this haunted manor, and I kind of like how this one ended. After that, I read We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kluwer, one of the books that you don't really know what's happening until the end, and I almost still don't think I know what happened. This one's gonna have to have a reread, but it was good, and it's getting a movie adaptation. They Wish They Were Us by Jessica Goodman, nothing special. I then read Incidents Around the House by Josh Malerman. Special, but not what I was expecting. Horror book told in the point of view of an 8-year-old girl who sees this other mommy that comes out of her closet every night to ask her if she can go inside her heart. A lot of metaphors. I'm gonna say metaphors metaphor heavy, and that's what I wasn't expecting. I cannot believe I forgot I read this book. That's Not My Name by Megan Lally, one of my favorite books of the year. Mystery thriller, following two different stories. I kept thinking I knew where this was gonna go, and I was completely wrong every time. After that, I read The Last One by Will Dean. This one was fun, but it made me really mad by the end of it. I'm gonna say not worth the read. After that, I read a really tiny short story by Madeline Miller, Galatea. I liked it. I need more though. I miss Madeline Miller. I need a full-length novel from her. After that, I read Pew by Catherine Lacey. I did like this one. I thought I was gonna love it. A book I did love after that is Dear Dolly by Dolly Alderton. Again, I love Dolly Alderton. I want to meet her. This was just collected wisdom. A bunch of people wrote in questions and things I wanted advice for, and she answered all of them in this. I read Carmen Maria Machado's short story book, Her Body and Other Parties. Short stories, I think, always are a hit or miss for me because sometimes I like some of them and then I don't like others. So this was okay. I loved some of them, didn't love others. After that, I read another classic, Lord of the Flies by William Golding, and honestly, I really enjoyed this one. Crazy how many things are still relevant and apply to today. After that, I read the December book club book, which was The Most Wonderful Crime of the Year by Ali Carter, and I really enjoyed this one. Definitely felt like Knives Out, like they said, but a rom-com version of it. It all comes back to Agatha Christie. It's giving that vibe. After that, I read A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by T. Kingfisher. This one honestly had such cozy, warm vibes, but I don't think I necessarily loved it by the end of it. We're now moving into all the short books that I read the past couple of days. I do have a full video that is going to come out with all my thoughts on these, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I have Susanna Clarke's The Wood at Midwinter, maybe worth the read. The Little Prince, worth the read. The Christmas Guest by Peter Swanson, maybe. Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, obviously worth the read. I cannot believe I didn't actually read this in high school. I thought this was going to be a reread, and then I realized I don't think I've ever fully read this book. After that, I read a bunch of books on my Kindle that were actually on Prime Reading, so you don't have to have Kindle Unlimited to read those. You just have to have Amazon Prime. I read Holiday Hideaway by Mary Kate Andrews, and I actually really enjoyed that one. I think that was like the first rom-com short story that I've read, and that one was fun. The Ushers by Joe Hill, worth the read. Short, but fun and different. When We Were Friends by Jane Green, I'm gonna say maybe. I think I like the fact that they were exploring like toxic relationships and friendships. I just could have done without that one though. I read Arc by Veronica Roth. That was a short story in like this collection of other sci-fi short stories. I did enjoy that one. And then I read one of the stories in the Valentine's romance author collection, the Improbable Meet Cute series, and it was The Exception to the Rule by Christina Lauren. Why was that one of my favorite romance stories of the year? The short story. It was a short story, and that was one of my favorite romance stories of the year. I'm like kind of interested in reading the other short stories in that series now, but I don't know if they can compare to how good that one was. Just like that, that is every single book I read in 2024. I cannot believe another year has passed. Every new reading year I have, I think it's the new best reading year I've had, and I feel the same way about it this year. I found so many new authors that I've loved, so many new favorite books and genres. I'm so happy I'm liking classics now. One of my goals for the new year is to read more nonfiction, but overall I do think this year was just super fun and super successful. So let me know in the comments how many books you read this year. Of course, it's never about the number, but if you had a goal, let me know if you reached it. Also, let me know what some of your New Year's resolutions are. I know I went over these really fast, so again, if you are interested in any of them and want to know more about them or my thoughts on them, I will leave links in the description to other Loranda videos where we go more in depth. But that's about it for today's video. So as always, join our book club if you haven't already. We're going to be voting on what book we're going to read in January. Also, make sure to check out all of my bookish social media accounts. Those links will also be in the description. And then of course, make sure to subscribe here and to Loranda Reads if you haven't already. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope everyone has a wonderful new year, and I will see you guys in 2025. It was like a secret society on campus type of thing.